Welcome back to the Explainer. Hey, if you're a law student right now, buried under a literal mountain of textbooks, desperately trying to make sense of some really abstract constitutional concepts, just take a breath. We've got you. Today, we're on a mission to decode the actual mechanics of a fair justice system. We're taking that massive, sometimes super intimidating concept of the rule of law and dragging it down from the clouds into concrete, everyday practice. Because honestly, this stuff is what actually protects our rights. We're going to look at the real-world stakes using some clear, relatable examples to really lock this into your memory. Let's do this. Real quick, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll define the rule of law. Second, the principles of a just system. Third, a wild case study on secret laws. Fourth, the publication requirement. And lastly, the independent judiciary. Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, defining the rule of law. So to really understand the rule of law, we kind of have to agree on what law actually is in the first place, right? There's this classic definition from Ruggiero. You've probably seen it cited in Tolentino's civil code commentaries. He basically says law is a norm of human conduct in social life, established by a sovereign organization and imposed for the compulsory observance of all. Okay, wordy, I know. But if we strip away all that legalese, it boils down to four basic things. It's a rule for human behavior, it's laid down by a competent authority, it's absolutely obligatory, and it applies to everyone, period. Think of it like the operating manual for society. To make this intuitively click, let's borrow a brilliant analogy from the Ombudsman's Handbook. Imagine walking into your very first day of law school, and the professor lays out the grading system right then and there. 10% attendance, 10% participation, 80% exams. Boom, you know the rules. Now, imagine an alternate reality where that professor says absolutely nothing. Then, halfway through your final exam, they suddenly announce that anyone wearing a blue shirt automatically fails. No way, right? That is intuitively unfair. You have to know the rules governing your conduct in advance so you can actually choose how to behave. This deeply human need for predictability, that is the beating heart of the rule of law. All right, moving right along to Section 2, Principles of a Just System. Let's look at how we build on that basic definition. Look, if you've ever felt completely lost when your professors start waxing philosophical about the rule of law, you are definitely not alone. Even U.S. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy once noted, the term rule of law is often invoked yet seldom defined. See? Even the highest judges in the world admit how tricky and abstract this term is. People have literally been arguing over it since Aristotle. So to keep our feet on the ground, let's break it down into its core moving parts. Legal scholar Robert Stein actually distilled this massive, unwieldy concept into a really handy checklist. First up, the superiority of law, meaning nobody, no matter how rich or powerful, gets a free pass. Second, separation of powers, which is absolutely crucial to prevent tyranny. Third, the law must be known and predictable. Remember our grading syllabus? Fourth, equal application across the board. Fifth, the laws themselves have to actually be just and respect human rights. And finally, you absolutely need an independent judiciary to enforce the whole shebang. When a society is hitting these benchmarks, that's when the rule of law is genuinely working. So how does this break down in reality? Let's check out Section 3, Case Study, Secret Laws, looking at the landmark Philippine case, Tanada v. Tuvera. I want to throw a strategic question your way. Can you be punished for breaking a law you have never even seen? Seriously, think back to our crazy professor analogy. What if the government wrote a massive book of criminal offenses, locked it inside a vault, and then just started arresting people for breaking the rules hidden in that vault? This sounds like a wild law school hypothetical, but it's not. This is the exact constitutional crisis that sparked our case study. What's so shocking here is the sheer volume of the problem. What you're looking at is a snippet straight from the Supreme Court record. It details this massive list of presidential decrees, letters of instructions, and general orders. We're talking hundreds of binding executive rules imposing fines, penalties, taxes, and they were all kept completely hidden from the public. People had literally no way of knowing what the government was secretly commanding them to do. And that brings us to the core conflict. The petitioners in this case stepped up and demanded the government publish these hidden decrees in the official gazette. They argued, hey, the public has a constitutional right to be informed on matters of public concern. But the government fought back. They argued that because these secret texts had their own effectivity dates written right inside them, they technically didn't need to be published to become law. They even tried to get the whole case thrown out on a technicality, claiming the petitioners lacked legal standing to sue because they hadn't been individually targeted yet. Which leads us straight into Section 4, the publication requirement, where the Supreme Court had to resolve this absolute mess. Now, you have definitely heard this famous Latin maxim in class: ignoranta legis non excusat. Ignorance of the law excuses no one. It's a bedrock rule in pretty much every legal system. But here's the massive catch. This rule only works, it only makes logical, ethical sense if the public actually has a way to read and understand the laws. If the state actively hides the rulebook, using this maxim to punish people is just straight-up tyranny. So the court totally dismantled the government's defense step by step. First off, they affirmed that yes, the public has a fundamental right to be informed, meaning citizens absolutely have the legal standing to demand publication. Second, they pointed right to Commonwealth Act 638, which explicitly mandates the publication of all presidential issuances of general applicability. And third, they ruled that secret laws fundamentally violate due process. Bottom line, you cannot be bound by a rule you haven't been officially informed of. Justice Escalon summed this up so brilliantly. He wrote, "It would be the height of injustice to punish or otherwise burden a citizen for the transgression of a law of which he had no notice whatsoever." The court ultimately ordered the publication of all those secret decrees. And this proves that the publication requirement, it's not just some boring bureaucratic hoop to jump through. It's the ultimate barrier against arbitrary power. It guarantees the law is actually known and predictable, hitting those core principles we talked about earlier. Let's zoom out for Section 5, the independent judiciary, and look at the actual engine making this work. Because, look, it's great to sit around and debate lofty theories about justice and due process, but without a robust system to enforce them, they're just words on paper. Citizens need a safe place to bring their disputes. The rule of law completely relies on an independent judiciary. You need an impartial umpire who won't just fold under pressure from the executive branch. Think about it. In Tenyata v. Tuvera, if the Supreme Court hadn't been independent enough to strike down those secret decrees, the whole concept of the rule of law would have just collapsed right there. And it goes further. Once an independent court makes a big landmark ruling like that, we need that ruling to stick around. Enter stare decisis. You know this one. It just means that conclusions reached in one case should be applied to future cases with basically the same facts. It creates stability. Because of stare decisis, the victory in Tenyata v. Tuvera isn't just a one-off win. It stands as a permanent, rock-solid precedent guaranteeing that all future laws absolutely must be published to be valid. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that these abstract legal theories you're wrestling with in your textbooks, they actually translate into very real, tangible safeguards. Independent courts step up to strike down unfair practices. Stare decisis locks those protections in place. Clear accountability ensures no one gets a free pass. And transparent lawmaking, like making sure laws are published, guarantees you won't be punished in the dark. These are the gears that literally keep a fair society turning every single day. We've seen how absolutely vital it is for laws to be known, predictable, and enforced without bias. But as you head back to the books, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. If the rule of law is truly our only real shield against arbitrary power, what happens to a society when the courts lose their independence? Or when those mechanisms of accountability just stop working? Figuring out the answer to that question is exactly why what you're studying right now matters so much. Thanks for hanging out with the Explainer today, and keep up the great work on your legal journey.